And sometimes I tell people I'm from the promised land.
We know where promise is.
My mother was Forrest Forbear, and my father was Joseph Ryan. My father was Irish, and he was born in Jefferson, South Dakota. And my mother, of course, was from this reservation, from the Two-Kettle Band. And my father, he left home when he was young. His his mother had passed away, and I'm not sure of that story, but she and the child, the baby, passed away, and how that happened, I don't know. So after that, he was left with his brother, and his father remarried. And when his father remarried, his stepmother didn't exactly care for the boys, so he invited them to go elsewhere. So he left home and worked at odd jobs going up into Canada and back down into South Dakota. And he helped to build my grandmother's house. And that's how he happened to meet my mother. And of course they were married, and there were 5 of us, an older brother Gene, myself, my sister Johanna, and brother Mike, and my little brother Leo. Leo had pneumonia when he was a baby, and they never went to the hospital back then. And they said if you lived 9 days with pneumonia, you would make it. Well, he lived 9 days, but it left him very frail and sickly. My mother passed away when I was 10, and so my father had 5 of us to raise. And all along the river, we called it the Owl River. It's the Mara River on the map, but the Hihamakwa was the Owl River. We grew up along the river, and all along the river there were grandmothers, and they wanted to take one of us here and one there. And that's a wonderful thing to do, and a good feeling that people did want you, but my dad didn't want us to leave. He wanted us to be together. So we grew up together, helping each other, learning to cook, and I became kind of like the mother or the one who did the sweeping, and we all learned to cook and take care of each other. My little brother Leo was 4. We took care of him. I don't know how we did it. But my father was a wonderful father. He had a huge garden, planted everything, and we had the river nearby. He set lines from one bank to the other and had drop lines. We had fish all the time. In the spring of the year, when we went home from school, we'd take a wooden barrel and with the bottom out and the top out, and find a spring along the riverbank and set it in there and cover it with a wood cover. And that was our cold drinking water during the summer. So we helped each other growing up like that. And at some point in time, I don't know when, we went to the boarding school. And that was a traumatic experience for us. My brothers were there. We never saw them. And when we first got there, my sister and I, we both had long braids. They cut our hair without asking our permission. I felt violated. I cried for several days. Nobody cared. And we had to line up to go to meals, and the bell would ring, and we'd go. So anyway, I ran away one time. I just wanted out of there, and I don't know how old I was, maybe 11. But what did I know about running away? But I wanted out of there. So I ran away, but they caught us, took us back. And my dad used to say, mind your teachers, do what you're told, and get a good education. No one can take that away from you. So I was kind of glad that they caught me, because I wasn't abiding by what my dad said. But my brother also, I don't know when they transferred him or how that came about, but he was down at Pier, my oldest brother, and he ran away. And he was determined that he wasn't going to go back. So my uncle hid him out for I really don't know how long. But the boss farmer would come checking, and he wouldn't tell him that he was there. Finally, he decided he would go back if they wouldn't whip him. So he went back. But my brother was smart. They passed him 2 grades at a time. And so he was 16 years old when he graduated from high school. He was too young to go to college. And so he worked for that, what back then they called it the CCCs.
Yes.
And they built dams. He had his own team and his own equipment. And he worked with the men to build dams till he was 18. And then he went to college.
He was in charge of his own team at the age of 16.
I'm sorry?
He was in charge of his own team at the age of 16.
He worked with the men.
Wow.
We went to Brookings where he went to college, and he graduated with a BS degree in agriculture. And he said, the only time I see an Indian is when I look in the mirror. And there was a lady, her name was Evelyn Bullhead from Standing Rock. She was there. So he called her one evening, and they sang a song to him. Evelyn doesn't live here anymore, so apparently she left. But as girls, we were supposed to be a housewife, a maid, or a secretary. We didn't have the wherewithal to be more than that. And we went to school 4 hours a day, and we worked 4 hours a day. And they had no child labor laws then. So we worked in the laundry, the kitchen, the dormitories, the employees club. And the boys were supposed to be laborers, ranchers, or I don't know what else. But they didn't expect us to be much, and we only had half the education that we should have had. And so I don't know what that did to a nation of children, to be put down and made to believe that they were stupid and dumb and couldn't learn. But my dad on the other side was saying, get a good education. No one can take that away from you. But I didn't know at that age that he knew more than we did, that with broken treaties, we lost land. My mother lost her land. She became a citizen in 1924. She had no way of paying taxes, but her land became taxable, so she lost her land, as did a lot of others. So the boarding school was a very traumatic experience for me. And here on our reservation, for the very first time this year, we've had conferences on historical trauma. And that was put on by my nephew, my oldest brother's son. And he's a retired psychologist, married to a retired psychologist. And they offered to come back here and do that for us. And so for the very first time, that has happened here, and it's long overdue.
Yes.
A lot of damage has been done. We have a lot of alcoholism, and as a retired nurse, I attribute that to the treatment that we received at boarding school, and it's devastating, and we see the results of that.
Despite having half an education, you became a nurse. That takes some real knowledge, especially a surgical nurse.
And you know, my sister, she became a secretary like she was supposed to do, and then she became a nurse. So she exceeded her expectations. And she worked in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and she was selected or chosen as Nurse of the Year for her work in cardiac rehab.
Oh, my.
Wow.
So she exceeded their expectations. But we need to tell you a story. When I went to St. Mary's School of Nursing for my nursing education, there was a lady from La Plante that went. I used to remember her name, but I don't anymore. She was there too. And we got a stack of books about like that. There's textbooks about like that. she looked through her books, and the first ride, she was gone. She never stayed. But I didn't look through my books, and I stayed. Yeah. Right.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
The boarding schools, I've heard that story, and there was a PBS special and so forth. Was it just almost conscription that you would go to the boarding school, it's just the way it was, or how did it happen that, you know, just everybody went to the boarding school? You seem to indicate it was so terrible and everything, but how did it just happen that everybody went to the boarding school?
Well, at first we went to a day school, and we walked to a day school 2 miles a day. But I think for myself, when my mother was sick, at that point, sometime we were put in the boarding school, and they brought them in from all over the reservation because they didn't have that many schools, I guess.
I think it was
I
a
know.
law.
Yeah.
I know one lady, she became a deacon in the church here, but she was from Cherry
Dora?
Creek.
Deacon Dora?
Yes. Have you heard her story?
She did, yes, we met her before she passed.
Yes.
She
And
shared
she-
that, yes.
She couldn't speak a word of English when she first went to school. I could speak both, so I was never whipped, but she was really abused.
So was it a matter of economics or just the law the way it was?
Do you remember the old Shirley Temple movies? Remember that? I'm trying to put it in context. Do you remember the old Shirley Temple movies where she kept trying to evade the school authorities? No?
Kind of, sort of.
No. It was law that every child attend public school. And they would go looking for you and put you in a boarding school if you weren't going to school.
So the boarding school was because of the lack of regular regional schooling?
Well, the government determined whether or not a family was suitable, and basically with the law, how the laws read here locally, it was another step in the genocide of the people, trying to break the strong culture from one generation to the next. And how do you do that? You stop the language, you stop the religion, and you separate the children from their families. And that's how it was done. And it lasted all the way up into the 60s.
I know my great-grandfather, forebear, Joseph Forebear, he signed the Port Laramie Treaty of 1868, and it's my belief that he felt that he had to live by that treaty. It was a peace treaty, and so it was like to put away your Indian ways and become white, and if you can't be who you are, then who are you? And I have a letter that my mother wrote in 1920, and she said my grandfather didn't so much as dance Indian till the day he died.
Oh my.
So our culture and traditions were removed way back then. And my grandmother wanted me to carry her Lakota name, Wigwunki Washtewi, which means pretty rainbow woman. But they didn't have a ceremony like they now do now. She gave me a shawl. It was a raspberry-colored shawl, and the name. So, but no ceremony. And I think it was in keeping with my grandfather signing the Port Laramie Treaty of 1868. And even on his tombstone, they moved his tombstone when they built the Wahi Reservoir. They moved them to La Plante. So I found his tombstone there, and it's a tall, white marble tombstone. And on the tombstone it's written, engraved, something about being a friend to the white man for over 30 years. Now, who put that there?
Yeah.
My people didn't have the money to do it, but he had to live that way in order to comply with that peace treaty. But on the other hand, nobody else kept the peace treaty. Our land was taken, and the Black Hills really are ours yet, because we have never been paid a dime for it. But our people live in poverty. Some say that it's, 80% unemployment. And how do children survive living in poverty? You know, I'm more fortunate because I've worked, and I have annuity to live by, and I help my family and my children. I have a granddaughter now who is a lawyer. She lives in Tucson, but her mother kept them in school out at Spearfish. I have another granddaughter who just graduated from college, and she's in psychology, and she is going on for her master's and then her doctorate. So they were smart, you know.
Oh, yeah.
But
Mrs. LeBeau, very bad things have happened to the Lakota people in history. Very bad things have been done to them. What are your hopes for the Lakota people for the future?
well, I always say that education is our salvation, and to help each other. But we have a lot of dysfunction here because of what has happened to us. Some don't even realize that why it exists or why it came about.
Would you like to see the Lakota language restored?
That is the basis of our culture and our tradition. And that is the reason we have all this dysfunction, because we're not living by our own culture and tradition. It's been taken away. And we're trying to, when I served on the tribal council, there was a resolution passed that Lakota language is mandated in the schools here on our reservation. So they're teaching it, but they're not. We have others in the school system who don't believe that it's important, so they don't push it as much as they should. So they take it from the time they're in kindergarten, but by the time they graduate, they can't speak it. And many of the homes don't speak it in their homes either now because of that. And I didn't teach it to my own children because of what happened to others at the boarding school. And that was the greatest disservice I ever did to my own